My name is Elise Morgan, and I used to believe that love came dressed in discipline and ambition. That the tight smiles, the sideways praise, the silence after my achievements, it all somehow meant they cared. That they were just trying to make me strong. But now I know better. Growing up in the Morgan household was like living on the edge of a stage, the lights always trained on my younger sister, Ava. She was golden in every way, golden hair, golden laugh, golden future. My parents adored her with a kind of ease that never extended my way. For them, Ava was a prodigy. For me, well, I was competent. My father, Charles Morgan, ran a regional logistics firm and often said he built it from sawdust and spit. He believed in merit, or so he said. But merit, in his world, always looked like someone else. My mother, Elaine, was more subtle, less thunderous in her judgments, but no less cutting. She wore pearls at breakfast and disappointment in her eyes when she looked at me. Ava danced, literally. Ballet, jazz, contemporary. Recitals filled our weekends, and our home was cluttered with trophies that caught the sunlight in all the ways I never did. I, meanwhile, loved systems, numbers, patterns. At 7, I had color-coded our pantry and created a rotating meal plan to maximize grocery savings. My father laughed when he saw it. "You'd make a great secretary one day," he'd said, patting my head like I was a loyal dog. I didn't cry then. I just started keeping notebooks. By high school, I was managing 3 school clubs, running a tutoring program, and already auditing my father's expense reports to help him spot inefficiencies. Ava had won a regional dance competition. They threw a party with catered hors d'oeuvres. When I received a state-level leadership award, my mother said, "Well, that'll look nice on your resume." Then went back to her crossword. When I was accepted to Stanford on a full scholarship, yes, full, they were polite about it. "That's impressive," my dad said, but the next words out of his mouth were, Ava's choreographer says Juilliard is a real possibility. The subtext was always clear. Ava was the artist, the star. I was the insurance policy. I went to Stanford and studied business with a quiet vengeance. I interned at every top firm I could talk my way into, often outworking students with shinier connections and louder confidence. But I never forgot who I was. Or rather, who they said I was. Then came the summer after graduation. I got an email, just a line, "Would you like to grab coffee? I think you might be the right kind of shark for my tank." It was signed Nathan Callahan, the founder of Callahan Consolidated, Fortune 100 CEO. A man who'd built empires on instinct and steel. A man who my father once called the last of the real leaders. I thought it was spam. But it wasn't. We met. We talked. He told me he'd read one of my economic case studies. He said it was ruthless in all the right ways. That I thought like someone who'd grown up under pressure and never quite belonged. And then he said something I've never forgotten. "You remind me of the son I never had." The room didn't spin. It shattered. Not because he said son I'd heard worse, but because for the first time, someone saw my strength not as an accident, but as a weapon. Not something to be tempered, but something to be trusted. He offered me a position, strategic analyst, direct report to his executive team. Within 3 years, I was COO. 5 years in, he stepped down. And he handed me the keys. CEO. The press lost its mind. Youngest female CEO in Callahan history. The girl who built walls out of being overlooked. The ghost turned general. But it was the reaction from home that I'll never forget. My father didn't call. Neither did my mother. But I received a family group message a week later. Ava's opening a dance studio in the city. So proud of her. No mention of me. Of what I had become. Until the quarterly shareholder gala. When my parents were invited as guests of one of the minor stakeholders they played golf with. They didn't know I'd be there. Or who I was now. But they found out. Oh, they found out. And what happened next? Well, let's just say I didn't need to raise my voice. The weight of truth did it for me. The night of the Callahan shareholder gala arrived draped in velvet and whispered power. The ballroom of the Whitmore Grand was flooded with light so warm it masked the sharpness in the air, an atmosphere built for billion-dollar decisions and 30-second judgments. The name Callahan glimmered in gold above the stage, embossed across a backdrop of rising graphs and legacy photos. And there, in the center of it all, was me. I wore deep blue silk, not to dazzle, but to declare. Authority doesn't always shout. Sometimes it glides. My assistant trailed behind me, checking names on a digital clipboard, while guests arrived in waves of perfume and entitlement. I shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and watched men 3 times my age stumble over their egos when I introduced myself as CEO. Then I saw them. My mother's hair was pinned in the same meticulous twist she wore for every important occasion. My father had chosen his finest blazer, one I remembered from Ava's recital when she danced the lead in Giselle. They moved confidently through the crowd, chatting with some of the junior investors. It was clear they thought they belonged here, thought they knew the game. And then my mother froze. She saw me. Not the version she'd last seen, the dutiful daughter with ink-stained fingers and sensible shoes, but the woman I'd grown into. Unapologetic. Whole. My name was displayed behind me in 20-foot gold lettering, and for once she couldn't ignore it. "Elise," she asked, her voice betraying the first crack. My father blinked. "What are you doing here?" I tilted my head, smile slow and deliberate. "Working. This is my event." He frowned. "Your event?" I turned slightly, motioning to the grand signage above us. "Elise Morgan, CEO, Callahan Consolidated." His face paled. "Impossible," he muttered. You're just. Just what?" I asked softly. "A support act? An afterthought?" My voice was calm, but inside, the thunder rolled. A few nearby guests turned, sensing the tension, the quiet spectacle unfolding. My assistant approached with impeccable timing. "Ms. Morgan, the board would like you to join them on stage in 10. "Ms. Morgan." I caught my father's eye. "Enjoy the evening," I said, before turning on my heel. As I walked away, I felt it, not vindication exactly, but a quiet exhale that had been lodged in my chest for a lifetime. They'd watched Ava dance on stages, win applause, bask in limelight. But now, they'd watch me command a room not with artifice, but authority. I took the stage as Nathan Callahan introduced me. "This woman rebuilt this company's backbone. She sees risk like most see color. And she's the only person I've ever trusted to carry this legacy." The applause was thunderous. I scanned the crowd and found my parents standing still, unsure whether to clap. My mother's hand hovered. My father's jaw was set like stone, cracking, maybe, but not broken yet. Later that evening, when the press had dispersed and the music softened into background hum, my father approached me again. "You didn't tell us." "No," I said, "I didn't." He looked at me the way one looks at something they don't yet understand, but suddenly need to, like a map in a language they'd never cared to learn. "This isn't how family works," he said stiffly. I gave him a look that burned. "No, this is how your family worked. I'm building something different." He blinked. And I walked away. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. It's not revenge or rage. It's the sound of your heels on a marble floor, leaving behind the people who couldn't imagine your rise, even as you soared past them. The following morning, I stood at the window of my office, 30 stories above the city that once felt so out of reach. Below, streams of morning traffic glinted like veins of steel, humming with a rhythm I had learned to orchestrate. A knock came. "Ms. Morgan," said Mara, my assistant, her voice crisp. "There's a Mr. Charles Morgan and Mrs. Elaine Morgan in the lobby. No appointment." I didn't turn. My fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the marble sill. "Tell them I'm in back-to-back meetings. Indefinitely." Mara hesitated, just enough to show she understood. "Understood," she replied, and closed the door behind her. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in denying them access, not yet. What I felt was clarity. For years, I had gone to them, handed them pieces of myself, hoping they'd recognize the shape of a daughter in the fragments. Now they were coming to me, and all I had to offer was silence. By mid-afternoon, a message appeared in my inbox. From Ava. Subject: let's talk? Please. I hadn't seen Ava since the last family holiday I'd agreed to attend, the one where she'd announced her engagement while I quietly celebrated a merger I'd brokered with a major tech firm. No one asked me about the deal. They were too busy fawning over the ring on her finger. I opened the email but didn't respond. I didn't know what she wanted yet, sisterly reconnection or another polished apology sculpted for show. Either way, I wasn't ready. Not until I'd sorted through the echoes still clinging to my ribs. That evening, I walked home instead of taking the car. The city air, cool and a little damp, wrapped around me like an old friend who remembers you before you had titles, suits, or power. My building stood tall, modern, and intentionally anonymous. The concierge greeted me by name. The elevator whispered me upward. Inside my apartment, I slipped out of the armor of the day, heels, blazer, the tight braid I wore like a crown. I curled into my reading chair with a glass of wine and stared at a photo on the shelf. Me and Ava. Age 9 and 7. I had my arm around her, smiling with that quiet pride only an older sibling knows. She had been the light in my world. Once. Until our parents turned that light into a spotlight and told me to stand outside its reach. I never hated Ava. I envied her ease, her acceptance, yes. But hate? No. She had no idea the cost of her crown. No idea the wounds I learned to dress in private. But now she was reaching out. And for the first time in a long while, I had the power to choose how our story would continue. Not as a forgotten older sister living in the shadow of applause, but as a woman who had carved her place into history with nothing but grit, vision, and a silence that could speak volumes. That night, I opened a fresh page in my journal and wrote 3 words. What comes next? Because that was the truest question. And I intended to answer it on my terms. The weekend arrived shrouded in an odd stillness. No boardroom calls, no back-to-back strategy sessions, just a stretch of hours that I couldn't disguise as productivity. I was left with my own thoughts, which could be far more relentless than any quarterly review. Ava's email still lingered in my inbox like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. I reread it. Elise, I don't know how to start this. I saw the news. I'm proud of you, truly. I know things haven't always been fair. Can we talk? Love. Ava. Fair. That word pricked something tender. The memory surged. Ava's sweet 16, when our parents gifted her a car with a bow so large it could have crowned a Macy's parade float. I had gotten a happy birthday text on my own 16th because they were out of town for her dance competition. Still, she wanted to talk. And some small, stubborn part of me, perhaps the girl in that photo on my shelf, wanted to believe she meant it. I agreed to meet her. We chose a quiet cafe tucked away from the city center, the kind of place where old wood creaked and secrets could exhale without judgment. I arrived first, ordered chamomile tea, and picked a corner table. Ava walked in 10 minutes later. She looked the same, radiant in that effortless way she'd always been, as though the world bent a little to smooth her path. But her eyes flicked nervously across the room until they landed on me. And then softened. Elise, she said gently, slipping into the chair across from me. Ava. Silence stretched between us, not hostile, but careful. Like we were sifting through a shared attic, uncertain which memories would crumble at our touch. I'm sorry, she said, her fingers curling around her mug. For how things were. For not seeing it then. I studied her, searching for the performance, the glint of showmanship our family prized. But her voice held no script. You didn't have to see it, I said. It wasn't your job, but you benefited from it. She nodded, shame rippling across her face. I know. And I let it happen. I didn't forgive her then, not fully. But I acknowledged the courage it took to say that aloud. To step out of the spotlight and admit it was never hers alone. We talked for over an hour. About her studio, her fears, her struggles. She confessed that her marriage had ended quietly 6 months ago. That our parents didn't even notice until she stopped bringing him to dinner. Everything felt so performative, she said. Success, love, even grief. I thought that was just how life worked. That's how they taught us life worked, I replied. But we don't have to keep learning it that way. When we stood to leave, she hugged me tentative, unsure if she had the right. I didn't pull away, but I didn't melt into it either. I wasn't the same sister she remembered. That night, I sat in my apartment again, the skyline glittering outside like a silent constellation of all the lives being lived at once. I wrote in my journal, even ghosts can change their shape. Maybe that was what she was trying to do, reclaim herself from the golden myth they made of her. And maybe I was learning how to be more than the forgotten one. The story wasn't over. It was only beginning to turn. The week after my meeting with Ava, a letter arrived at my office. Not an email or a couriered brief, an actual letter, sealed in navy wax and addressed in the precise cursive I recognized immediately. My father's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet. Elise. I hear congratulations are in order. CEO. Quite the accomplishment. Your mother and I would like to invite you for dinner, just us. No distractions. We'd like to understand how you got here. Regards, Charles Morgan. Understand. The word echoed in my chest like an old wound reopening. They didn't want to celebrate me. They wanted to dissect me, figure out how the silent daughter turned into the woman who commanded rooms they weren't even allowed to enter. But still, something pulled at me. Not for their sake. For mine. I agreed. The house looked the same, white columns, navy shutters, the same manicured bushes my mother trimmed every Saturday with obsessive precision. Walking up the path felt like approaching a museum dedicated to someone I used to be. They greeted me at the door, stiff but composed. My father in his usual navy sweater, my mother in pearls. As though nothing had changed. As though time hadn't exposed everything they'd ignored in me. Dinner was salmon with roasted vegetables and silence, until my father finally cleared his throat. So, he said, Callahan's quite a ship. How did you steer it your way? I didn't steer it, I replied calmly. I earned it. He saw my work and trusted me. He nodded slowly, calculating. And this trust, it came before or after you gave up family for ambition? There it was. The accusation, wrapped in velvet. I set down my fork. You gave up me a long time ago, Dad. You just didn't notice. He said nothing. My mother's lips parted slightly, but no defense came. Do you remember when I won the National Economics Award in high school? I asked. Of course, my mother said quickly. You were always so diligent. You left the ceremony halfway through to make Ava's dress rehearsal, I said. You waved from the back and said, do us proud. That was it. My father looked down, suddenly fascinated by his plate. That's not ambition, I said. That's survival. I stopped asking you to see me because I learned how to see myself. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was heavy, like grief. Not for what had happened, but for everything that never did. I rose to leave. We could try again, my mother said softly. I paused, hand on the back of the chair. You can start by trying to know me now. Not by the shadow you cast over me for years, but by the light I've become on my own. Outside, the air was thick with summer dusk. I walked back to my car with a strange calm in my chest. That night, I called Ava. How would you feel about investing in your studio? I asked. There was a pause. Seriously? Seriously. I want to build something. For us. Something they'll never understand. Because sometimes legacy isn't inherited. It's forged by the ones who were never meant to carry it. The day I wired the initial investment into Ava's studio fund, I wrote a note and sent it along with the confirmation. Build something they can't take credit for. Elise. It wasn't about charity. It wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about giving us, her, me, a future that didn't orbit around our parents' approval. A future where our names stood alone, not as footnotes to the ones who couldn't see us until we outranked them. 2 weeks later, Ava invited me to tour the space. It was raw and echoing, with sun-drenched windows and exposed brick bones waiting for breath. She walked me through the blueprints, pointing out rehearsal spaces, an art wall for young dancers to paint between classes, even a quiet room for kids who needed a moment to gather themselves. Not every child is built for the spotlight, she said, casting a look my way. I want a place that makes space for all of them. I nodded, emotion catching in my throat. I saw something in her then, not just remorse, but revolution. Back at Callahan, the tide of work surged as it always did, but something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt the need to outrun their voices. I wasn't running anymore. I was building. The annual Callahan Women's Leadership Summit was approaching, and for the first time, I decided to keynote. Not as a CEO chasing numbers, but as a woman who had earned her place in a room once locked to her. The night before, I stood alone on the stage, testing my mic, my heels clicking on the hardwood like punctuation marks in a language I now spoke fluently. I looked out at the rows of empty chairs and whispered to the air. This is for the girl who used to whisper her worth into a pillow. The next day, the room filled with women from every corner of the industry, executives, founders, first-generation entrepreneurs, interns still finding their voice. When I stepped on stage, the applause was real. Not polite. Not obligatory. Earned. I began with a story. I was once told by my father that leadership was about command, that titles earned obedience. But I've learned that real leadership begins when you stop waiting to be invited to the table and build one of your own. Heads nodded. Some smiled. A few wept. My parents used to call me practical. My sister was the star. I was the scaffolding. But the thing about scaffolding is it holds everything up. And then I shared the truth. About how a man who saw me not as a woman, but as a mind, chose me. Not in spite of where I came from, but because of it. I didn't name names. But I didn't need to. My voice carried the story women already knew in their bones. The long, quiet walk from invisibility to influence. After the speech, I stood near the exit, thanking attendees one by one. And then I saw her. My mother. She looked smaller somehow. Her posture wasn't frail, but it had softened. Her eyes, rimmed with something deeper than mascara. Elise, she said. Mom. I'm sorry I didn't know how to be proud of you before. I see it now. I wanted to say I don't need your pride anymore. But that would have been a lie. I did. And I nodded. Thank you. We stood there for a moment, the silence not brittle anymore, but tender. Fragile. A beginning. That night, I wrote again in my journal. I am the architect of my own name, and I no longer whisper. 2 weeks passed before I heard from my father again. A letter, this time handwritten on the stationery he reserved for important matters, wills, company policies, condolences. The envelope was thick, the kind that suggested deliberation. Not emotion, but construction. Inside, a note. Elise. I watched your keynote. I don't agree with all of it, but I can't deny what you've built. I still don't know how you got here, but maybe that's the point. Dad, it wasn't an apology. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was the closest thing to surrender I'd ever seen from him. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my journal, next to a dried leaf I'd once picked up on a walk after failing a college finance exam. The day I promised myself I wouldn't define success by anyone else's version ever again. Callahan was entering a new phase, an expansion into European markets, and I was preparing to fly to Zurich for our first major pitch abroad. As I packed, I noticed something on my bookshelf. The first notebook I ever filled. A black spiral-bound journal, pages dense with numbers, ideas, and scrawled dreams. I remembered the night I'd started it, 14 years old, sitting on the bedroom floor, listening to Ava's laughter echo through the house as she practiced her solo dance routine in the living room, our parents cheering from the couch. That night, I'd lit a single lamp and began planning the business I would one day lead. I flipped to the last page, where I'd written a promise in uneven letters. I'll build something no one can ignore. A vow kept. On the flight to Zurich, I stared out the window at the stars suspended over the Atlantic, small, defiant fires in the vast black sky. I thought about legacy. Not the kind built on old money or inherited titles, but the kind that rose from silence, brick by careful brick. Zurich was cold, bright, efficient. We met with potential partners in a glass tower that overlooked the river, and by the time we walked out, Callahan had secured a foothold in a market once deemed impossible. At the celebratory dinner that evening, Nathan Callahan, now retired and finally taking the sailing sabbatical he always dreamed of, called me. "Proud of you, kid," he said. Didn't need me to say it, but still. "I know," I replied, voice soft. "You know," he added, "your father called me last week." I blinked. "What?" Said he watched your keynote. Asked me what I saw in you back then. "What did you say?" Nathan chuckled. I told him I saw myself. But better. The line went quiet for a beat. And then, "You're not his legacy, Elise. You're your own." That night, I didn't sleep. I stood at the hotel window, watching the lights of Zurich hum against the river. And I finally wept. Not out of grief. Not even joy. But because the story had turned. Because the girl who once begged for acknowledgement no longer needed it to breathe. The world had changed. And I had changed it. Returning from Zurich felt different than any other business trip before. Not because of jet lag or accolades, but because I no longer returned to a place where I had something to prove. My name, once a whisper in boardrooms and a sigh at family dinners, now lived above doors, on executive memos, in morning headlines. It lived, finally, without needing justification. Back at headquarters, the executive team met in the penthouse conference room overlooking the skyline. I walked into applause, genuine, uncoerced, warm. Not just for the deal we had closed, but for the person I had become while closing it. Afterward, Mara pulled me aside. "Facilities wants to confirm your decision about the office redesign. They're ready to install the new signage." I hesitated. The idea had been floated weeks ago, an offer to rename the executive wing after me, the Morgan Suite. But something in me resisted the symbolism. It still felt too wrapped in a name that bore more scars than victories. "No," I said quietly. "Not Morgan." Mara blinked. "What would you like instead?" I paused, then smiled. "Call it the blueprint." She nodded, catching the layers beneath my words. It wasn't about my name. It was about what I had built. About the plan I'd drawn when no one else saw the foundation I was laying. The vision I followed in silence until silence was no longer necessary. Later that week, Ava sent me an invitation. Her studio, Emerge, was opening its doors with a community showcase. No velvet ropes, no champagne. Just music, art, and young girls twirling across a stage Ava had paid for herself. When I walked in, she met me at the entrance, eyes shining. "You came." "Of course." The room was alive with movement, laughter, color, barefoot joy. I took a seat in the back as the lights dimmed. A group of girls in pale lavender dresses took the stage, and the music began. But this wasn't ballet or jazz or anything conventional. It was spoken word. And movement. The first girl stepped forward and said, "My voice was too small," they said. "So I made it bigger with my feet." Another. "I was told I was too much. So I danced until too much looked like freedom." The audience erupted in applause. And I sat there, tears in my eyes, not because I was proud of my sister, but because she had used her light to help others step out of the shadows. After the show, Ava and I stood alone in the dressing room. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "You already did. Out there." She smiled. "You were always the blueprint, Elise. I just didn't know how to read you before." I touched her shoulder. "And now? Now I see everything." On the drive home, I passed by our childhood house. Just a glimpse. just enough to remind me where I began. But I didn't stop. I didn't need to. That place no longer owned any part of me that I hadn't reclaimed. That night, I entered my apartment and stood for a long while looking at my reflection in the glass. Not searching for flaws, not checking for cracks, just marveling at the woman who had survived everything and still learned how to build. And in my journal, I wrote, "Legacy isn't what they give you. It's what you leave behind that couldn't have existed without you." Fall settled into the city with its quiet revolution, gold-tipped trees, breath fogging against the morning air, and the scent of transition woven into every breeze. It was a season that demanded reflection, and for once, I had space to meet it head-on. The board requested a retreat, something less sterile than a conference room and more personal than a video call. We chose the Hudson Valley. A restored manor perched above the river, fireplaces crackling in every room, and windows that framed the changing leaves like portraits. On the second night, after a dinner of wild mushroom risotto and reluctant small talk, I gathered the team around the fire. No PowerPoints, no agendas, just the pulse of orange flame and the truth. "I want to ask a question," I said, leaning forward, elbows on my knees. They turned toward me, executives from cities I hadn't visited yet, some older, some younger, all sharp. "What did it take for you to get here?" I asked. Not the resume version. The real one. A silence settled, not awkward, but heavy. Then one by one, stories surfaced. A mother who raised 3 kids while finishing law school at night. A man who overcame stuttering to become a world-class negotiator. A woman who'd fled a country where ambition was a crime. And then it was my turn. I told them about being the daughter who wasn't seen. About building a fortress out of silence. About being called practical, as though it were a sentence instead of a skill. I didn't cry, but someone did. And that's when I realized leadership isn't about distance. It's about connection. Not guarding your throne, but lifting the drawbridge and letting others in. After the retreat, something shifted at Callahan. Meetings became more honest. Staff began sharing ideas that had lived too long in their throats. We started an internal mentorship program that paired new hires with senior leads, not for performance reviews, but for storytelling, for truth-telling. I called it the Echo Project, because sometimes the loudest voice in the room should be the one that's been quiet too long. One afternoon, as I walked through the newly renovated wing, the blueprint, I saw something on the wall near the elevator. A framed quote, printed in soft charcoal ink on parchment. "The blueprint isn't the building. It's the proof that the vision was always there." Elise Morgan. I hadn't approved it. I didn't need to. My legacy had started to echo, without me speaking at all. That evening, I called Nathan Callahan again. "I want to expand our scholarship program," I said. "Not just business students. Girls. From schools like the one I went to." "You're thinking long game," he said. "I like that." "No," I corrected gently. "I'm thinking about the girl who stayed late after school to tutor her classmates and still got called invisible at the dinner table. I'm building a ladder she never had." He was quiet for a beat. Then, "You always did know how to make silence useful." I laughed softly. "You taught me that." But the truth? I taught myself. The day the call came, I was reviewing proposals for a sustainability partnership. A quiet afternoon, the kind I'd learned to appreciate between storms. Mara stepped in, her expression unreadable. "Your father, he's in the hospital. Stroke. Minor, they say. Your mother called. She's asking for you." I stared at her, the words hanging in the air like smoke. Not from grief. Not from panic. But from the haunting realization that I didn't know what to feel. I went. Not for him. Not even for her. For the part of me that still believed in closure. Mass General was all sterile light and hushed urgency. When I entered the room, my mother was seated beside the bed, her hand wrapped around his. He looked smaller, as if deflated by something he couldn't control for the first time. "Elise," she whispered, standing. I nodded, stepping closer. How is he? Confused, but stable. He stirred, eyes fluttering open. When they settled on me, something shifted, recognition, then surprise. Then something softer. Didn't think you'd come, he rasped. You didn't ask, I said. A half smile, crooked, still sharp. Silence sat between us, but it wasn't the weapon it used to be. It was a bridge, suspended and trembling. I'm sorry, he said. 2 words, barely audible. I didn't speak. Not right away. Instead, I sat beside him and pulled out my phone, opened a picture. This is Ava's studio, I said. She's doing good work. He studied it, nodding. Your mother told me. You helped. And this, I continued, swiping to the next photo, is our scholarship recipient. First in her family to go to college. His eyes lingered. You built something, he whispered. Bigger than I ever imagined. You imagined the wrong things, I replied, voice calm. And you built for the wrong reasons. He closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down. Will you forgive me? I wanted to say yes. To offer peace. But forgiveness is not a light switch. It is a slow draw of water from a deep, reluctant well. I don't know, I said. But I'm trying. 3 weeks later, I received word from their attorney. My father had amended the will. Half of everything, business stakes, property, liquid assets, left to me. A symbolic gesture, perhaps. Or guilt. I called the attorney. I'm declining. He paused. You're sure? I am. Transfer it to the foundation. Let the blueprint serve more than me. He agreed. I hung up and exhaled. Because inheritance, I realized, isn't about money or land or names etched on deeds. It's about impact. It's about deciding what we pass down when no one's watching. That evening, Ava called me, breathless with excitement. You're on the cover of Forbes, she said. I laughed. Hope they got my good side. They titled it The Silent Architect. I paused, heart-catching. That's not bad. No, she said. It's perfect. In the quiet that followed, I thought of every girl who'd ever been told to lower her voice, to stay behind the curtain, to make space for someone shinier. And I whispered into the dusk. This is our inheritance now. It was strange how the rooms that once rejected me now opened before I even reached the threshold. Invitations poured in from conferences, think tanks, panels on leadership and equity. My face, once absent from family albums and boardroom walls, was now printed on event banners, lit softly under hotel chandeliers where people spoke in sound bites and vision statements. But one invitation made my breath catch. We would be honored if you would return to Stanford to deliver this year's commencement address. Stanford. The place where I had first allowed myself to believe I could be something more than the sum of their silence. Where I had eaten meals alone for the first time, cried over statistics textbooks, and discovered that solitude wasn't loneliness, it was space to bloom. I said yes. The day arrived bright and impossibly clear. Rows of caps tilted under the sun. Nervous graduates, proud families, laughter spilling into the California breeze. When I took the stage, I paused at the podium and looked out at the sea of young faces. Then I began. When I was your age, someone very close to me told me I was not the type to lead. That success looked a certain way, and I didn't look like it, sound like it, walk like it. So I became a blueprint. I built a foundation from the parts of me they ignored. And every wall I constructed was made of lessons they never meant to teach me. How to be resilient in absence, how to thrive in silence, how to dream while everyone else applauded someone else. And then, I made the roof out of legacy. Not the kind you inherit, the kind you choose. And now I walk into every room knowing that I designed it. Not for comfort, but for truth. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. But it was the moments after, the quiet thank yous from students, the handwritten notes left backstage, that carried the weight. One note, folded neatly, read, "You reminded me I don't have to fit their mold. I can make my own." Later that week, back at headquarters, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box. I opened it to find a silver compass and a note. For all the places you'll go next. Thank you for showing us the way. A grateful stranger. I held it in my palm, the metal warm from my touch. There's a myth we're taught early, especially girls, that if you're quiet, obedient, practical, you'll be rewarded with safety and, eventually, praise. That if you carry enough burdens without complaint, someone will lift one for you someday. But I had learned the truth. You lift your own. You build your staircase while they're still drawing blueprints for someone else. And you climb. It had been months since my father's stroke and my refusal of his inheritance, but a quiet truce had settled between us, neither warm nor cold, just the hushed stillness that follows a storm too powerful to name. My mother called sometimes. Ava more often. But I had learned that closeness doesn't have to be physical. Sometimes it's a matter of intention. Still, there was one door I hadn't opened yet. Their house. The one where I grew up. Where my dreams first cracked against hardwood floors and were later folded into notebooks beneath my mattress. I returned one Saturday in late spring. Ava met me in the driveway. She'd already begun clearing out the attic for them, downsizing, she said. Too many things holding space that don't serve anyone anymore. She handed me a box. Yours, she said. From your room. Inside, old notebooks, a ribbon from a middle school science fair I'd won without fanfare, and a photograph I had forgotten existed. Me and my father, standing beside his office desk. I was 12, holding a mock business plan I had drawn with markers. He had one hand on my shoulder and a faint smile. The caption Ava had scribbled in her childish scrawl read, CEO of Elise Incorporated. I ran my thumb over the photo, stunned by the cruel symmetry. Even then, I'd been designing something they couldn't yet recognize. Later, inside the house, I walked through each room like a museum patron. Everything was smaller now. The walls, the furniture, the echo of who I'd once been. In my old bedroom, I sat on the bed and opened one of the journals. Page after page of dreams. A coffee shop I would one day run. A community center where kids could learn coding. A letter to my future self. If they still don't see you, keep building. One day the world will. I closed the book. No tears this time. Just reverence for the girl who wrote it. On my way out, I paused in the hallway and looked at the family photos on the wall. They hadn't changed. Still dominated by Ava's recitals and my parents' anniversaries. Still curated, still selective. But now I didn't need a frame. I had built my own story. As I stepped outside, my father stood at the porch, leaning on a cane. Elise, he said quietly. I turned. There's a lot I can't undo, he admitted. But I see it now. The way you held it all. Even when we gave you nothing. I nodded once. I didn't need your permission, I said. I needed my own. He smiled, the faintest curve of it. You always had it. We just didn't know what to call it. I walked to my car, box in hand, the past no longer heavy, just honest. That night, I sat in my apartment and unpacked the box slowly. One ribbon, one journal, one photograph, each a relic, each a testament. And on the last page of the final notebook, I wrote, forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering without rage. And moving anyway. The world noticed. Not all at once, not with ticker tape parades or press blitzes, but with a quiet reverence that echoed louder than applause. Invitations now came with words like inspiration, trailblazer, mentor. And I accepted them not because I needed validation, but because I wanted to leave handprints for the ones behind me. One morning, I stood at the front of a classroom, not a boardroom, for a guest lecture at a girls' leadership academy. Rows of young faces looked back at me, some curious, some skeptical, all quietly hungry. I told them the story, not the Forbes version, not the keynote polish. I told them about being overlooked, about notebooks filled in silence, about sitting at family dinners where praise never passed my plate, about learning to design a life when no one handed me the blueprint. Afterward, one girl approached. She couldn't have been more than 15. My mom says I talk too much, she said. That I should let my brother lead. I knelt so we were eye level. Maybe your voice is loud because it's trying to build something no one else can see yet. She blinked, then smiled. That night, Ava sent me a photo. A wall in her studio, painted by her students with quotes from women they admired. One, written in looping lavender script, read, "Build the room they won't let you enter. Then lock the door behind you and invite only the worthy." Elise Morgan. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not out of pride, but awe. Because what I'd built wasn't just a business. It was a myth undone. It was a truth rewritten. It was a beacon. Soon after, Callahan began construction on a new headquarters, a structure designed for light, for transparency, for inclusion. The architect asked if I had a vision. I sent them a single photo, my childhood journal, open to the first page. A blueprint, drawn in purple ink, corners uneven, dreams spilling past the margins, and underneath it, I wrote, "This is what vision looks like when no one's looking." I asked for one thing in the final design, a hallway of names. Not donors, not executives, girls, scholars, firsts. Not the polished, not the perfect, the persistent. It was early winter when I returned to the coastal town where I'd once buried my ambition beneath politeness and performance. Callahan had acquired a local tech startup nestled in the bluffs of Maine, and I volunteered to visit the new team. The town was sleepy, the streets lined with seafoam and frost. But I remembered this town. It had been a backdrop to many summers growing up, a place where our family rented a house and played at being close. Where Ava danced barefoot in the sand while I read management books under a striped umbrella, pretending the ocean didn't make me feel unseen. Now I arrived as someone else. And yet, still me. At the local cafe, I met with the startup founder, a woman named Talia who wore her brilliance like armor and asked sharp questions about culture, not just margins. "You built Callahan into a values-driven empire," she said over black coffee. "How did you keep your soul intact?" I smiled. I lost it for a while. Then I remembered it wasn't gone, just buried under other people's definitions of success. She paused, then nodded. "We've never had a female partner. Until now." That night, I walked to the bluff. The wind was brutal, slicing across my cheeks, but I stood there alone, alive, completely unafraid. I opened my coat and let the cold in because I had nothing to hide anymore. I whispered to the waves, I made it. Not loudly, not defiantly, just truthfully. The next morning, before returning to the city, I stopped by the bookstore we used to visit as kids. The owner, an older man with silver eyebrows and a voice like gravel, recognized me. "You were the one always reading business books," he said. "But the lean startup with quarters." I laughed. "Sounds about right." He pointed to a shelf by the register. "Got a new section. Women in business. You're in there." I turned. And there it was, Women Who Build, with my face on the cover of Chapter 5. My knees didn't go weak. My eyes didn't well. I just breathed. Even the sea can't wash away a woman who plants her future in stone. Back in the city, I returned to a letter waiting at my office. From my mother. "Elise, we cleared out the attic. Found more of your journals." I read one. "You were already becoming her. I just didn't know how to be her mother. I'm learning now. If you'll let me." I didn't respond right away. Some truths need time to settle. Even forgiveness needs to stretch its legs before it walks into the room. But I kept the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it beside the compass I'd been given months earlier. Because every journey starts with direction. And this one? This one pointed home. Spring arrived early that year, the kind that came not in grand gestures, but in subtle signs. The soft thaw of old ice, the whisper of blossoms returning to city windowsills. And with it came invitations. Not the kind you framed or flaunted. The kind that asked for something far harder than your presence. One Sunday afternoon, Ava called. "They're selling the house," she said. "Mom and Dad. Downsizing, finally. I felt the weight of those words, not as grief, but as closure stitched carefully with years of unmet expectations. I thought you might want to come by. Say goodbye properly. I hesitated. Is that what this is now? Proper? A small laugh. No, just real. So I went. The house looked the same on the outside, white columns now chipped, shutters slightly faded. But inside, everything was shifting. The walls were bare. The staircase, once echoing with competition and footsteps that always trailed Ava's applause, now stood stripped and still. My mother met me in the living room. Her posture was gentler now, the sharp edges dulled by time and reckoning. We're donating a lot, she said. But there's one thing I set aside. She handed me a box. Inside were all the journals. Every one I'd ever left behind. Pages dog-eared and filled with diagrams, dreams, calculations no one had praised. And on top, my acceptance letter to Stanford. Creased, worn, treasured not by me but by her, it seemed. I found it in your drawer, she said. I kept it. I just didn't know how to tell you then. I looked at her, this woman who once only saw my worth in contrast to someone else's light. And now she stood before me, not perfect, but willing. It's okay, I said. You see it now. She nodded, tears welling. You always saw it first. I was just late to the truth. Before I left, I walked through the house one last time. My old bedroom, now empty. The kitchen table where so many dreams were served cold. The hallway where my name was never spoken with pride. And then I stepped outside. Ava followed. Do you ever think, she asked, that maybe none of this was for nothing? I turned to her, the spring wind lifting a strand of her hair. I know it wasn't. Because the truth is, what we survive becomes our scaffolding. What they overlook becomes our cornerstone. And every silence they ever gave us, we transform into song. That night, I returned to the city, to my building, my home. I opened one of the old journals, found a blank page near the back. And I wrote, the walls that once ignored me are gone. I don't need a new house. I built a world. The Callahan Spring Gala had always been a black tie affair. A stage for industry giants and their polished successors to whisper deals over champagne and violin strings. But this year, the board asked me to open the evening. A new tradition, they said. A reflection of new leadership. I stood behind the curtain, listening as the MC read my name. The applause swelled, but I didn't rush. I walked out slowly, deliberately, as if every step was a reclamation of the girl they once told to tone it down. The room quieted before I spoke. Tonight, I began, we gather not just to celebrate what has been built, but to honor those who built anyway. A pause. I was once told I lacked the charm to lead, that I was all edges and too much clarity. But here's what I've learned. Clarity is not the enemy of grace. It is the map. The room leaned in. Every woman in this room has carried something quietly, the fear of being dismissed, the exhaustion of being overlooked, the ache of being enough and never being told so. And yet, here you are. Still rising. Still building. I closed with the same line I had once written in the corner of a worn notebook. Don't wait for the echo. Become it. When I stepped off the stage, I didn't look for their approval. I listened for something else. And I heard it. Not applause. Not accolades. But resonance. Later that night, alone in my office, I opened my inbox to find a message from someone I hadn't expected. Subject: your words tonight. From Jennifer Lynn, Callahan intern. Elise, I've never spoken in meetings. I'm always the note-taker. But after your speech, I asked a question today. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was mine. Thank you for showing me how to speak without permission. I closed my laptop and leaned back. That was it. Not the cover stories, not the interviews, not even the stage. It was her. It was the one girl who realized that her silence was not safety, it was captivity. And she'd chosen to break free. The next morning, I arrived early at the office and asked Mara to schedule a company-wide initiative. Rising Room, a monthly space where every woman at Callahan could present an idea, a pitch, a challenge, with zero interruptions, zero rebuttals. Only listening. Only lifting. She smiled. You're building echoes. No, I replied. I'm building architects. By the time summer arrived, the Rising Room was no longer just a meeting, it was a movement. What began as a monthly session in a conference lounge soon needed the main auditorium. Interns stood beside VPs, engineers beside marketers, each voice rising not in competition, but in harmony. One afternoon, Mara approached my desk, her voice lit with something like pride. You should see the sign-up list for this quarter's Rising Room, she said. We've got over 100. And a waiting list. I leaned back, smiling. Add one more slot. Mine. When the day arrived, I wore no blazer, no title. Just a soft blue shirt and my name. Not CEO. Just Elise. I was the last to speak. I walked up with a single note card in my hand. No slides. No numbers. I want to tell you a story, I began. A long time ago, there was a girl who thought that the way to be seen was to become someone else, quieter, smaller, easier to love. She buried her strength under compliance, hoping they would dig deep enough to find it. I paused. Faces watched, waiting. But they never dug. So she climbed instead. And one day, when she reached the top of the cliff they told her she'd never see, she didn't scream, didn't shout. She built a table and made seats for every girl who'd ever been told to wait. The auditorium was silent. Then a voice from the back, young, maybe 20, called out, "What happened to the girl?" I smiled. She became the architect. Not of buildings, but of belief. And she's still building. After the session, I stood in the lobby, answering questions, accepting hugs, watching the room swell with possibility. A young woman lingered near the door, hesitant. When I approached, she handed me a folded slip of paper. No name. Inside, a drawing, simple pencil lines of a woman standing on a ladder, one arm stretched upward holding blueprints. At the top, my future. At the bottom, scribbled faintly, because of you. I didn't cry then. I waited until I got home. Then I placed the drawing beside all the others, the compass, the note from Ava, my first business plan scrawled in childhood ink. And I wrote in my journal, this table, these echoes, this room. It was never about them. It was always about who would come next.